Welcome everyone to City Life Show. I'm Cliff Krieger, your host. It's Monday the 14th of February. That means it's Valentine's Day. Happy Valentine's Day to everyone. I have with me today George Zaharoulis. Hi, George.
Hi, how you doing?
Good. Fru and Kembang. Fru.
Good morning.
And we have Mike Smith.
Morning, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day.
And we have our producer, John McDonough. You brought up during the week offline about a Tennessee woman who was sentenced to 6 years in jail for election fraud. And the person that in the YouTube video was comparing her to she was a Democrat, black, comparing her to 3 Caucasian men Republicans who had been caught fiddling elections and were sentenced to just a few days.
These men were all found guilty of committing voter fraud in the 2020 election. The gentleman in the upper left, he's a Republican from Nevada. His wife died several years ago. He nevertheless filled out her ballot and cast it in the presidential election. He then participated in efforts with the Nevada Republican Party to claim that his dead wife's ballot being cast in the election must mean there was mass voter fraud by Democrats. He is the one who cast his dead wife's ballot. He's a Republican. He got caught. He was sentenced to probation. That's the guy in the upper left. Guy in the upper right, he's a Republican elected official from Ohio. In his case, it was his father who died, and he cast his dead father's ballot in the 2020 election. That Ohio Republican official was sentenced to a grand total of 3 days in jail. Keep going clockwise. The gentleman on the lower right, he's from Pennsylvania. In his case, it was his mother who had died. He nevertheless cast her ballot for Donald Trump in the 2020 election. He was caught. He got probation. And then the last guy, lower left there, he's another Pennsylvania Republican whose mother also died. Apparently he couldn't help himself. He cast a ballot in her name in the 2020 election. He got caught. He got probation. That's what those guys have in common. Now this is Pamela Moses of Memphis, Tennessee. This week, Ms. Moses was also sentenced for a crime related to her efforts to vote in the 2020 election. Ms. Moses had a felony conviction in Tennessee that legally resulted in her not being allowed to vote again in that state. But she says that nobody ever told her that that particular conviction meant that she couldn't vote. And her county elections board admits in writing that despite her conviction, they never actually took her off the voting rolls. A probation officer with the Tennessee Department of Corrections even wrote her a note, filled out an official certificate saying that Ms. Moses was eligible to vote. Ms. Moses turned in that certificate from the probation officer along with her voter registration application. And for that grave crime, she was just sentenced in Tennessee. What was her sentence? She got 6 years in prison. That has just happened this week in Tennessee. What's the big difference between Pam Moses in Tennessee and all those other guys who actually cast illegal ballots in the name of relatives they definitely knew were dead? All of those guys got probation, in one case 3 days in jail. She got 6 years in prison for trying to register to vote after she had received an official certificate from the probation department telling her it was okay if she registered to vote. 6 years in prison is her sentence.
Fru, back to the back to this woman in Tennessee that got 6 years. I agree with you that that is disproportionate to what other people are getting for activities with regard to voting. On the other hand, this was a follow-up to a previous felony in which she had misrepresented facts before the court, as I recall. You got any thoughts yourself on this?
Well, that I brought that because we've talked about diversity on this show a lot, and the impact and the effect of diversity. And some people do not really see diversity the way most of the minority and the brown people see it. But to get back to that point, in terms of diversity, I think I am here in Lowell. Lowell has advanced very, very farther than many cities in the nation. Because, like as I mentioned about the celebration of Black history, that in itself was historic in the sense that you saw for the first time there were many brown people at the City Hall celebrating Black history, not only Black history itself, but it was actually bringing an aspect of people who've not been represented so that the city is whole and we look at things fairly and squarely on the face. Going back to that, the article that you mentioned, I think it's equally very, very sad that you would say that she had been a felony or all this, while the law officials and the city and the voting officials should actually approved her card. All politicians, they knowingly casted the vote for their dead relatives. And these are political people who are serving, 4 of them. Some they just gave them probation. The other they gave him 3 days. But with all the due justification that this Black system respected and showed the card that was legal, legitimate, and her name was not taken off the vote. They gave her 6 years. And anyone, even a blind person hearing that, would just say that sentence was not based on what she did, on her character, but it was simply based on how she looks and maybe how she talks, because she talks with an accent.
I just want to chime in. I saw all that through and Cliff, and I was appalled in this day and age that still we are dealing with these issues like that. I mean, it's so sad that, and I would have thought that Tennessee has progressed further along in the way they're looking at things. But when you see things like this, it just brings back the problems with the southern states again. As an American, I just can't fathom that people are still doing these idiotic, hurtful, racist, hateful things to people of color. It's just despicable that they are still trying to do this to people unfairly. I read it. I had to look at it twice to make sure I was really seeing that. It was just terrible.
Of America, you pick any place you want. I don't care where you pick, but you'll be judge, jury, and executioner. I illegally voted across the street in my state. What is my appropriate penalty? Oh, this has never happened before. It's happened in the past. What have other people got for wrongfully voted? Good morning, Mr. Zaharoulis.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Thank you.
I believe that you should hit people in the pocketbook for something like this.
Okay.
Sending somebody to jail
So
for this kind of offense is not going to
100. How much?
productive.
How much? 100, 1,000, 1,000,000. What's the
I think the penalty should be a minimum $1,000, and because that will get people's attention. That if they get caught for voter fraud, it's going to hurt them.
Okay, and it should be okay. So just kept that to the carpet. Nobody's going to know I did it, or you're going to let. See, in Massachusetts, when you break a law, it's a secret who broke the law because they're accused. We can't say their name until they're convicted. So moving over to Fru. So
Wait, before you move over, if you haven't been convicted, you didn't break the law.
Fru.
You are innocent until proven guilty.
So you catch me red-handed. And voting illegally. What is my penalty? You're the judge, the jury, the executioner. Fru, what happens to me?
John, maybe you may not like how I answer that question, but the question is a level playing field. If we put all these things are in the books, the punishment are in the books.
Well, I'm asking you, just a second. My question, some lady got like 40 years or something, some ridiculous term, down in Tennessee. I'm asking you, generically, what do you think should happen to somebody who that votes illegally? What should we do to that person? And if you don't have an answer, I respect that. I respect that answer too.
No, I don't have an answer because there are already answers that are not being applied equally. That is why that question came.
I understand. I'm going to move over to George Harulas now. George, so you caught me red-handed voting illegally using somebody else's name. What's my penalty? You're judge, jury, and executioner.
I think there's a fine that goes along with that.
How much? $1?
I think if you hit them in the pocketbook, and if they don't have the money, jail time.
Okay, so $1? Just $1? How much is
No, it's gotta be at least 1,000.
Okay, to our esteemed host. So you catch me red-handed, voting illegally. What happens to me, Judge Clifford?
Well, if it was you, I'd have you executed because you know better. But Fru says we have to be fair amongst groups, and to that extent, I'd say a $500 fine and a suspension of your voting rights for 2 years.
Any publicity? Do I get any publicity? Or is it kept secret?
It's all up to the newspaper.
The thing is,
no secrets. Democracy demands openness. We can't be hiding these things. No star chambers.
No talking in code. Mike, what were you going to say?
well, I agree with Fru that it has to be applied equally. So if you have a structure.
Across the street here to the Rogers School, I used a dead person's name, and I voted in their place. And you guys are saying, I want a level playing field. Okay, that's the scenario. I voted illegally. That's the scenario, okay? So now you know what the scenario is. And now, Michael, is that okay in your book?
Well, look, voting illegally is not okay, but what I'm saying is, I don't think you're catching what Fru's saying is, we want a level playing field. So the way you have a level playing field is, you say, if you get caught voting illegally, you're going to get $1,000 fine. There's no leeway on what the judge does or whatever. It's $1,000 fine, and it could be you're suspended from voting, like Cliff said, for 2 years. Okay,
so or is it public information?
That kind of penalty does not look at your color, your race, your ethnicity. It's like a speeding ticket. You get caught speeding in New York and you're going 80 miles an hour in a 55, the fine is this much, and you get this many points on your license.
Is it held secretly or is it public information?
You can find that publicly. They have stuff in the local papers all the time. People are arrested for this, or they were, I mean, they don't usually have it for getting a speeding ticket, but it's.
John, I'd like to reason with you.
Okay, go right, please.
I think that what I get in your question is it should go public, because now that this issue in Tennessee has gotten public, that lady's sentence may be reduced. But if you say 5,000, let me tell you, that 5,000 to privileged people is nothing. That 5,000 to some other person is life. The whole family, the whole community will go. So when you are imposing some fines or whatever, know that even when they go to court, others will go free. But though they will use those very laws to penalize the people that the laws are meant to protect.
No, I understand what you're saying, Prue. I don't disagree with that. But if you don't have any kind of guideline, and again, I agree with you, is that the law has to be applied equally. And that is an issue. When you can afford a high-powered lawyer who can bend his words around, that makes a big difference. Now, I don't disagree.
From John's point of view, it should go public.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, it should be public.
Okay,
Because
so what's the fine?
John, the fine is public because democracy is sensitizing the people and let the people
Never
get
gonna work.
public.
Never gonna work. I watch
When
some
you
of
hide
these.
it,
I watch some of these
when you
Looney
put it-
Tunes on live television. Be happy to show their face, being disruptive, doing silly things. They're happy to show their face. So if you don't want to hit them in the wall, I respect your answer. Thank you.
So, just something that's
just to close on that, John, when you put a fine, I am saying those 4 people are Congress, they are rich people. You put 10,000, they will pay. But if I come there, that 10,000 will affect my community.
Bro, you know what? When you get pulled over for doing 100 miles an hour on 495, they don't care how rich or poor you are. You pay the same fine. So I'm just asking you, what should the fine be? And if you say there should be no fine, just public, I respect your answer. But you know what? The public action of you getting pulled over on 495 and a cop waving a piece of paper in the air is not public enough information for me. But you're going to have to pay a fine, and your driver's license gets tagged, and you pay an extra insurance fee, and they don't care how poor you are. That's how it works in Massachusetts. Listening to you.
Even in Massachusetts, let me tell you that if we are driving at 95 miles per hour in the same area, the police stop you, the police can give you a ticket of $50, but for me, he can give me a ticket of $500. That has happened just because of the looks. That police officer has the priority to give you that ticket. Putting laws or whatever is not the solution, because we can commit the same crime. It is in the books. But I will get nailed down because the system has sensitized people to weigh heavily on others. But you will not feel that pinch that I'm feeling. And if I try to explain to you, you will never see it, because he who wears the shoe knows the angle it pinches most. You will only be seeing the shoes from the top, but my leg is in the shoe, killing me.
we got Winterfest coming up this weekend on Friday and Saturday. There's going to be food and music and drink by the Memorial Auditorium there on Brown Street. There's going to be other activities by St. Anne's Church. Anybody got any thoughts on Winterfest?
You mentioned food and all that, but I also see the opportunity. I have the one African restaurant downtown SAHEL. I think that's the only African restaurant north of Boston, and it's really in Lowell. And you look at it's situated on Central Street, just by where you have the bridge over the canal there. So it is one of those cultural diversity that they are bringing a taste of Africa to Lowell. And I see those are some of the things that are making Lowell more diverse.
But to Winterfest, I was out trying to make sure that the screen I'm showing on my monitor was actually appearing on TV. And then